we're all gonna die. Not right now or anything. Sorry, don't panic. Just in general, death is inevitable. And so it's worth thinking about, not in a sentimental way or a saccharine or depressing way, just in kind of a honest way. And so, while Death's Door deserves all the praise in the world for being an excellent action RPG and one of the best games of the year, it's also one of the best games about death that I've ever played. It's a game full of cute, quirky, zany characters, but it's also a game about loss, where characters die and are eulogized, and then are gone because they're dead. Like, this is a game that's as much Zelda in its DNA as it is a Brothers Grimm fairy tale. But despite their small two-man team, Death's Door developer Acid Nerve have been tackling big topics since their humble beginnings.
The origin of Acid Nerve is kind of just cosmic luck, really. Like, we made a game jam in 3 days, and then it kind of went semi-viral online. And I remember, like, Devolver Digital tweeted at me to say, like, hey, do you want to talk about your game? Everything escalated from that moment, which is kind of weird to think that, like, our lives changed because of a tweet online. Nigel from Devolver Digital, like, reached out to us there, and we had a chat with him. I remember him saying, like, oh yeah, just, you know, send us a pitch over. And we're like, okay, what's a pitch? We need to work out what a pitch is now. And then, like, we were just really, like, didn't know what we were doing, like, just kids basically just messing about. And we got all that together, and they were like, yeah, cool. We were really nervous about it, and like, yeah, sounds good, let's do it. So just like, it went from there. And then, yeah, like you said, we were at E3 like not that long after it, which is kind of insane, going from making a game in your bedroom over a weekend. Suddenly we were in Los Angeles, like showing it off to journalists and stuff. So that was the start of our, like, you know, professional gaming career. Me and David had worked on a few things together before then. We made a little Flash game called Leave Me Alone, maybe like a year or two before Titan Souls was ever made. And then we kind of expanded on that into like a bigger Flash game for a site where we did get paid, but it was like not a lot of money or anything, but we were just kind of happy to be doing some game stuff.
I remember just when we were pitching for Titan Souls, we were just so clueless. Like, Devolver said, oh, are you going to fund this yourself, or do you want to ask us for some money to fund it? And we were like, I guess we should ask for some money. How much should we ask for? And then they told us how much to ask for, and then we basically sent them that amount, and they're like, okay. And so, like, I think we've definitely come a long way since then and learned a lot in our process, to the point that making Death's Door, we almost felt like a legitimate professional company at some
point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long journey for sure.
After we'd finished Titan Souls, we kind of took some time to just mess around with a few different ideas and playing around with Unity for the first time as well. And then we started trying to do some kind of 3D work. We did try to do something straight away, but then kind of didn't really have anything that we were really feeling at the time. Like, looking back, we can see the prototypes were actually called like Death's Door, and they were kind of revolving around the idea of doors and stuff. But the crow part of it wasn't there at the time. But we kind of went our separate ways and did our own thing for a while. I went traveling around Asia, like made a prototype when I was just on the road for like just some combat stuff. And I sent that to David, and he liked that, and we thought we'd try kind of expanding on that at this point. And that's how things started to get rolling. And then at some point during that, I added a little crow character to it. So, because it was initially just like a big capsule running around with an invisible sword. And then as soon as we added the crow, we're like, oh yeah, this is a good idea. We can do something with it.
There were quite a few early versions of Death's Door. We've experimented with quite a lot of different 3D styles and approaches to the art of it and the kind of general character. So there was one prototype that was completely third person, and then a couple of different top-down prototypes. But the thing that was there from the very start was that we really wanted it to be an evolution of Titan Souls, like kind of a follow-up to Titan Souls. Because after Titan Souls, we did a bit of a smaller mobile game called Telepain. That was kind of like our way of doing something with a bit less pressure. But then after having enough of a break, we were like, okay, I think we can, like, Titan Souls was still our bigger debut game, and we felt ready to follow that up. So it always had some of that DNA at its core, but it also always had I'm not really sure where we had the inspiration to make a game with these themes, but I think from our very first prototype, it always had this theme of death and theme of doors as part of the mechanics. So that's kind of been a thread through all of the prototypes as well.
We definitely are inspired by loads of different sources, like not just games. I think the original idea with the doors was from, I watched Howl's Moving Castle, which is great, and it has a door in it where he would be able to change the lock to like go to a new location, and that was like the very first kind of seed of the idea, where our initial prototypes were actually just a single door where we'd have that in this central area, and you can like go to different areas through it, different bosses and stuff like that. That kind of evolved into what Death's Door became. But yeah, it's interesting that that was the first thing. It was like the doors came first and the crows and stuff came after. He turns into a crow in it as well, doesn't he? Maybe there's a lot of subconscious stuff going on with that.
I think in our heads, we still see Titan Souls as like a very textbook, minimalist indie game. And Death's Door definitely something where we deliberately avoided that kind of mechanically concise approach where it's all about just pushing one mechanic to its limits. We see Death's Door as like something that we call like a proper game, really. We knew from the start that we wanted to do that. I think Titan Souls, because it had those minimal mechanics that we were limited by, we did kind of have a process where we had to be creative with boss designs. We had to figure out ways that we could make a boss behave in a way where it would be challenging to just get this single hit in, and also like they could kill you in one hit as well, so we had to kind of design their behavior around that too. I feel like that was such a good exercise in thinking about varied ways that you can create 20 different bosses in a game and make them all feel distinctive and unique. I think just because we enjoyed that challenge so much, we naturally wanted to keep that as part of Death's Door and use that as something that was like a core to our design philosophy, but then everything else around it is so much more involved and there's so much more to do and more variety in what you are doing.
The initial combat was like the first thing that we did for the game, so we had that combat in the game straight away, before any art went in, before anything went in, and we did iterate on it as we went through. Like the initial prototype had, when you slashed, it was like an instant amount of damage, which as we went further along with development, it felt wrong to like as soon as you press the button it's doing damage, so we added like a little delay and stuff like that in, which is just something you kind of work out as you go along. The first ideas were kind of inspired by Zelda, and Hyperlight Drifter was a good one for it as well, because the combat in that is really tight and nice. So we kind of looked at a bunch of these different games and how they handle things, and we knew we wanted it to be kind of a fast-paced game, whereas Dark Souls is more animation-based. This is a bit more like fast. It's instant like slashes, and then the time that you spend in the animation is after the slashes happen, so it feels a bit more reactive than a game like Dark Souls, which is all about the weight of your weapons and the way it feels in that way. For us as like a small studio as well, and indies, it's better for us to just like do stuff that's faster paced and quicker to iterate on like that, because if it's something more based in animation, it's going to be a lot more work to kind of, if you want to add in these different weapons with these different massive like animation changes and things like that, it adds a lot more time to the development process, I think.
The feel of hitting an enemy and connecting with an enemy was there from the start, because I feel like without that no one's going to like the game, so it's one of the most important fundamental things to get right. There were times that we iterated that just to even more enhance it as we went through the game. We also iterated on the difficulty quite a lot through a lot of playtesting. Like normally the process with any kind of new enemy or a new boss is like Mark will make the initial prototype, send it to me, and then like I will basically complain about how it's far too difficult, point out all the moves that I think are just like a bit too unfair, like this enemy can just like hit you from too far or turn around too quick and stuff like that. And then there's a level of iteration that we go through in this kind of initial phase. I think like all game developers do, we did a bunch of playtesting with our like game developer friends, like local game devs and stuff like that, which is always handy for iteration, because even after just the first few months of development, then me and Mark are both way too good at the game to give any kind of objective view on how difficult it is, so you always need fresh hands on it. Devolver actually set up this full like focus testing, basically the kind of thing that I guess most AAA games probably go through a bunch of as well. It was really useful. It was just amazing. Like I think 12 people who didn't work in game development played through the game, and we had a recording of all of their reactions throughout the whole process, all of their thoughts on it. This was probably at like the 2/3 point of development, and that was at the perfect time to say, like, we know what the game is, but this just gives it that extra final layer of tuning, which I think really helped with how accessible the game became to the wider audience when it came out.
There was just a few little bits where we needed to kind of smooth it over a bit. Like, there was a few bosses. I think bosses are the main issue when you're going for difficulty things. Yeah, some of those needed like making a bit easier, basically, because they were too difficult. Like Betty is something that a lot of people bounce off as people say that's one of the harder bosses in the game. At that point, it was probably a lot harder because it had a lot more health, so it just went on for a long time. Having that feedback helped us to kind of smooth over the difficulty curve and get it to where we want. But it is something that's still subjective. Like some people complain that like the last boss is too difficult for them. It's just something you kind of have to do your best to like get it to how you think it is supposed to be.
Early on, we did have this kind of narrow goal of how difficult we wanted it to be. It was like somewhere that was like challenging enough to feel like an intense game and like something that, you know, might make your hands a bit sweaty, but not defeating in a way that Titan Souls, like, I feel like a much greater percentage of players felt defeated by the difficulty and were more likely to bounce off it. I think we were never really going for that in Death's Door, so really early on we did think, well, your first try on a boss should feel like, oh, okay, this is serious, this is going to challenge me. But then it's something where, like, once you kind of get a bit more used to it, then you're more likely to overcome it. And then also the fact that you can explore the world some more and have this opportunity to find more secrets and more upgrades and things like that to make it easier for yourself. It just makes the game in general more accessible for a game that is at its core quite intense.
We're going for more of a slightly harder Zelda than, say, a Dark Souls type game. Like, it doesn't punish you in the same way that something like Dark Souls does, really. Like, we try to be liberal with the checkpoint system and like shortcuts and things like that, so, you know, before every boss you can pretty much just like run straight from the nearest checkpoint and it's not too far away or anything. And when you die, you don't lose any of your currency or anything like that, so you can just go and upgrade. We kind of like didn't want to punish people too much for like making a mistake, and so it encourages people to go and explore as well, because then they're not afraid of like, oh, if I die, I'm just gonna respawn at the checkpoint. I'm not gonna like lose all my souls and have to go track them down or anything like that.
The thought of making a video game with just a few people may seem like an impossible task, but what I've come to realize is that a game studio is a lot like a boat. It may seem at first like having 300 people on board to do a bunch of different tasks would be useful, but the bigger the boat, the harder it is to maneuver and the slower it turns. But making a game with such a small team comes with its own unique set of challenges.
I think the scope is kind of determined by necessity in some ways. Like the first year and a half of development, we had just a huge list of all of these areas we wanted to make, and we were just making stuff willy-nilly, like creating loads of different biomes and coming up with all these different plans for the game. We had kind of a halfway point where we decided to give the game some structure in a way where it had this intro and then a little bit more defined chapters and an end. It's always good to have this kind of scope in mind for this kind of game so that you can polish all the content to the level that you're happy with without kind of overshooting it and then realizing you only have a month left to tie everything together. So there's that aspect to it. But then also, I think in terms of the end product, it does mean that we're able to dedicate more time to develop each individual character. So Death's Door does follow this structure where it's like the kind of bulky middle section of the game is in 3 chapters, and each one is more or less dedicated to its own set of characters, or normally like a main antagonistic boss character. And because you have that focus, you can actually build up their personalities and their backstories and show the player a lot more about how they've impacted their individual section of the world. So hopefully each one of them feels like quite a nice self-contained journey with an arc amidst the broader story.
One thing we tried to do with the characters was make sure that nothing was like just an evil bad guy. Like everyone had their own motivations for why they were doing the things they were doing. Like Grandma was trying to research like evading death, and the main theme throughout the entire game is people trying to get away with, you know, not dying, and the kind of the fallout from that. We just kind of set these rules up for ourselves and just explored them in a way where we could think like, if I was this character, how would I behave, or how would this other character like interact with the world based on like how you think they were raised and stuff like that. And the Lord of Doors as a character is kind of, he's a bit of like a Marvel villain sort of thing. Like he's kind of obviously a bad guy in the story, but he doesn't seem that bad when you're interacting with him. You can certainly sort of empathize with him based on their like lifetime and the things that happen to them in the story.
I feel like one of the things that makes that kind of emotional tone of our game distinctive is that we kind of have these themes of death and like all this backstory, but we never really tried to make the game overtly sorrowful, or we never really tried to make the characters like really overdo how much they're in a horrible situation, or like they don't talk to you as though they're obviously in despair. And I feel like that kind of makes it more human in a way, because you like the situation of the world is bleak, but every line of dialogue doesn't necessarily just dwell on that, because people are people, and people react to things in different ways. And I feel like we have this almost casual tone to the way some of the characters speak, which does help when there are poignant moments in the game. They possibly catch you more by surprise, because it's not really obvious that we're shooting for that all the time. I definitely think that misery and humor just go so hand in hand together. Some of that comes from like a British self-deprecating, sarcastic perspective as well.
Exploring the themes of death was something we wanted to do from the offset, because that was the, you know, core aspect of the game, but we didn't want to focus on it in such a negative way or anything. Like you can imagine if we'd gone in a certain direction with the game, it would have been a lot grimmer. Like if there wasn't those kind of humorous elements to it to kind of offset those negative themes, it would have just been a really harrowing tale. But having the jokes and the cute characters and stuff that offset it like help a lot with that. Like a lot of the game is built around these contradictions. Like the entire world is dying basically because nothing is dying. So like no life is being brought into the world. It's just like a stagnant kind of wasteland with all these old characters who are just living forever.
Our original story it was focused around one character, and they had opened all these doors, and you would go through these doors and each of them would tell a story about this one character's journey to evade death. It helped us come up with all these interesting little ideas about this character's journey. And then I think when we made Death's Door as it is today, we basically split all those different approaches into different characters to like really emphasize each of them in terms of a distinctive personality.
I dabbled in animation and kind of rigging and models and stuff like that for a while, but like I'd never really properly done it. So for this, we initially started out using an animator to do some stuff, but it was a bit of a sluggish process, like getting things sent off and then returned to us like in the state we need them, and then being like, okay, I need kind of an extra animation transition here. So it ended up being like a lot faster for us to just iterate over things if I did it myself. And I actually really enjoyed it. It was one of my favorite parts of the game to work on, so it worked out quite well. But maybe some of the animations just aren't quite as polished as maybe they could have been, like when they were made earlier on in the project, as I got better throughout. But it was certainly a good thing for our project because we could just go so much faster and go over things. Like if I was making a boss, I can just do a few animation states, try it out in game as a prototype, and then I can just constantly keep adding more stuff as we iterate over it. And that's the way we work for everything in games. Basically, it's just kind of starting with something, then building it up for a bit, and then going back and polishing it and iterating, and it's just kind of a cyclical process. So when we were like making those bosses and enemies and things like that, the fact that I could just animate it myself quickly and get it in just helped us massively with the process. I think if we didn't do that, it might have been a smaller game, because we have to wait for someone else to, you know, get these assets back to us, and then if there's something wrong, we have to ask them to do more things to it, and it's much slower when you add more people in.
Acid Nerve itself is just myself and Mark, and we've been collaborating on games for, I don't know, maybe almost 10 years at this point. Between us, we cover everything other than art. And Mark actually does cover a bit of art and did art on some of our games, but we generally like to collaborate with artists because we kind of specialize in everything else. And it's quite a fun part of the process of coming up with a game, is figuring out the art style and potentially like making a bunch of games all with different art styles. So for example, most of our games before this have been 2D pixel art, collaborating with various pixel artists and 2D artists. And we knew we wanted to escalate things for Death's Door. We've kind of been tempted by the world of 3D for a while. The smaller a team is, the better, but 3D does need to add a few people into the mix for sure. So we still kept it minimal. We had 2 part-time concept artists and 1 full-time modeler with us for the main portion of development. And then we had some other help in other areas, like a bit of story and script editing and UI design, just for more brief periods. But yeah, generally, like, the bulk of the game is done by a 2-person core development team and 3-person art team, basically. The most important thing with collaboration is to really spend a long time choosing who you're going to work with. And we went through such a painstaking process, just looking through portfolio after portfolio through ArtStation, really putting a lot of time and effort into finding people who we felt like had the same kind of taste as us and would be able to tune themselves to our vision. Most of the people we actually work with, we just contacted outright after seeing their portfolio. And then I think the benefit of that is that if you are working with people who you have that, like, such a high level of initial trust, is that you don't need to go like through cycle after cycle of feedback and iteration, because if someone's really in tune with the vision from the start, then a lot of the time their first idea is going to be the best idea. And like being able to have that trust is part of, I think, how we managed to make such a big game for a small team in the amount of time that we made it in. There was a lot of initial work. Like, we did put a lot of time into making a story bible so that every time we brought someone onto the team, we could say, here's our world, like, we need you to really understand this world, everything about the backstory and the tone that we're going for. Like, the first person we brought on was Fritz, the concept artist, and we sent him all this information, and the first thing he sent us was like 2 weeks worth of sketches, and everything we saw we just loved straight away, and it all felt like something that would really fit. Like, it's weird having, because me and Mark have been talking for months at this point about the feel and the mood and the design of the game, and I think just from the amount of conversations we probably had quite a similar vision in our head about how the game was going to look, or at least how the look of the game was going to make you feel. And it was weird just immediately seeing exactly that and being like, yes, this is it. Like, these are the kind of character designs we want and the kind of visual aesthetic we want to the world. So it was really nice having a team who really could just constantly deliver. There would always be kind of like an initial idea for what's going on in this area or what this enemy is going to do. So there'd be a little bit of upfront information, but then it would normally just be, after a few days, we'd get a sketch back and see it, and normally that would be like an exciting moment of like, oh, this is so cool, such a cool idea.
But also, because of the way we worked in this kind of flat structure, sometimes like Fritz or Sarah or someone would just send us a sketch and we'd like think, oh, that's cool, we should just make that. Like, one of the first bosses you fight in the world was actually not something we'd ever discussed or asked for. It was just something that Fritz had drawn. It was called like Domkirk or something like that, and it was this big cathedral that had legs, and we were like, that's cool, we should just like make that and put it in the game. And he was like, oh yeah, okay, I'll just like tidy up this sketch and like get it in. It was like the most complicated model ever, but we got that, and it's such a cool, like, interesting looking boss. in the initial prototype pitch that we sent to Devolver, there was a boss in it that we called the Redeemer, and it's still called Redeemer in the code, but that's what the castle ended up being. So that was the first boss we ever made. In fact, probably the first enemy we properly made as well. It kind of informed the area as well, because we had the graveyard was like set up already, but then when we created this character, we took the parts of it and turned them into just regular models and put those everywhere as well. So it kind of ingrained it more into the environment, because then it seems like it's like an actual structure from the world. So that kind of process of like just, you know, circling around helped that fit into the world even more.
If you've watched this far, there's a pretty good chance that you've played Death's Door and maybe also Titan Souls. But if you haven't played both games through to their true endings, then you might want to skip this next chapter and head straight for the conclusion. If, however, you're into secrets, like the kind of secrets that shatter your very perception, things are about to get a little cosmic.
Something that might not be immediately obvious with the connection between the two games is the fact that it isn't something that we like tacked on at the end or anything like that. That is the seed for the entire game's story and the world itself. So the actual world of Titan Souls and the world of Death's Door is the same environment. Like the map structure is the same. There's a few key points that you can kind of use as anchors to sort of see the structure of the world, where like the Frog King is in Knight Elhanan's cathedral from the first game. It's set like a long time after, so there's a lot of like changes to the environment of like, it's undergone a lot of different things like flooding and wear and tear and stuff like that, but the core of it is the same. The Grey Crow, the old crow, he was assigned the task of reaping the soul of the protagonist of Titan Souls. So when that was impossible because he'd gone through Death's Door, the original Death's Door, like that's when the kind of events of this game would all be set up. The character of Truth is supposed to be this kind of omnipresent kind of god-like entity who knows everything. So it's also kind of inspired by a character from a Patrick Rothfuss book. I can't remember how to pronounce the name of it, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone say it before, but it's like Kate or something like that. And it's this like big tree that knows everything, and it's trying to send anyone who interacts with it is like tainted, because they'll have the worst possible outcome ever, because this tree can just say anything to you to get you to do what it can see happening in the future. And that was kind of the original little inspiration for Truth, as well as like visually being inspired by Fullmetal Alchemist. But it's not necessarily like an evil thing. Like it's not trying to cause harm like that character is in Patrick Rothfuss's book. But that idea of an entity that knows everything that's going to happen, but still has some kind of like will and motivation. Like I find that quite interesting. Like what are they trying to do? If they're initially from Titan Souls, they know everything that's going to happen, and they know this kid is going to come along and fight it and then take it outside, and then it knows what's going to happen with the crow coming to find it there. So it's kind of whispering these things to the free crows, and like it's manipulating the world around it so that the events of the game will happen in the way that they happen, because it knows by the end of it that you will go into the final chamber, which is the actual place that the end boss of Titan Souls happens in, but it's like collapsed into the mountain after that door is broken open. It just projects out these things into the world so that it will get what it wants, and the story will come to this ultimate point, and that's why it's the true ending.
Death's Door kind of like plants the seed for anyone who has played Titan Souls. It kind of gets a little bit more overt with nods to it as time goes on, but still to the point where I think our intention is that a player might be like, oh, this, like Titan Souls, or like, hang on, is that similar to something that I remember from Titan Souls? To me, that's quite an exciting thing, because the game isn't confirming it, but you're starting to have your own suspicions. And then I think the moment that the true ending starts and it actually shows the kid from Titan Souls, that's like an aha moment combined with like for players who realized it in advance, like a moment that they can feel very proud of themselves for like having put all this time into both games and realizing this connection. So I think the first time you see the tower from Titan Souls and the boy is like the moment of confirmation for players, I think.
When you get to things like Truth, that was definitely inspired by the kind of weird visual idea of what angels were supposed to look like, which is like unfathomable to a human, kind of like Cthulhu sort of thing, you know, just something that you're not supposed to be able to perceive because it's of a higher dimension. So we kind of used those descriptive ideas and any kind of images we could find to inspire like the Truth design. Titan Souls had a lot of those kind of religious elements to it, like classic kind of Bible story kind of things, like from Judaism and Christianity. Some of the characters on it were named in a way that would reference some biblical characters, like Elhanan. If you Google it, you can find that like he was maybe the one who killed Goliath, you know, the whole story of like David versus Goliath, and that was kind of a nod to that. Set, which is supposed to be the name of Seth, and then Cain and Abel. It's cool. I don't think I've really been able to speak about like truth and like religious like, influence and stuff on the game before, so it's good to kind of like say it out loud and get some of it off my chest, because it's one of those things where you don't know if people really pick up on it or not. We have a lot of written lore in the background that is never presented in the game in a tangible way. It's just there to influence like where things are and what's going on. So the story in our heads was like Elhanan went through this process, he killed Goliath, and the stories of him like reached the outside world, which is why his name is written in English as well, so you can perceive it, because your character you're playing as has previously heard of this knight. He had gone through this process, couldn't progress any further, he couldn't kill any more of the Titans or anything, and kind of like slowly became a Titan himself just by being in that area. Like in the same way that all the characters in Death's Door, if they live for too long, they become like demonic and kind of lose their sense of self. Those rules of Titan Souls were then passed along to Death's Door because it's the same world, and those things permeate the entire universe that we've created.
I think when we were making it, like, we had absolutely no idea what our expectations should have been. You know, like, we'd been working on it for so long and we knew we liked it, but we only announced it a few months before release as well. And even, like, the announcement seemed to really resonate with people, but even then we really didn't know what the reach of the game was. Going into, like, the moment that the game came out and all the reviews came out at the same time, like, we just had no idea. I was just sitting on my sofa, just like waiting for it to happen with no idea what to expect. But like, no doubt then the response did like massively exceed any expectations that we ever would have dreamed of having for it, for sure. Like, my stance going into it was like, okay, like, I think we've made a pretty good game here. Like, people should be mostly happy. It'd be nice to get like one really glowing review from someone, just like someone who it really resonates with. We were just sat there waiting, and then reviews just came in one after the other, and it was just like every review was just glowing, and we were just like, no way, just I cannot believe this.
For me, I think we've kind of landed into a good kind of workflow, really, of this kind of scale of team. Like, me and David work pretty well together, just like focusing on what we do at the moment, and then introducing a couple of artists seems to be like the optimal workflow for us. I think in future, maybe we could introduce a few more people to help out with certain things. Like, we've learned a lot from making this game and made a load of mistakes on it as well. So hopefully going into any future projects with that information in mind, hopefully we can, you know, do something a bit more efficiently, you know, get more out of our time. But I would like to make something of a similar kind of scale as well. It's been really fun, like, working in this world and with this kind of freedom as well, compared to Titan Souls, which is a lot more stripped back. So it would be good to kind of explore like this kind of big open world kind of thing again. But yeah, we wouldn't want to go any bigger really, or like too much wider a scope, because I think it becomes hard to deal with as such a small team. So you have to play to your strengths and kind of focus on smaller aspects of things and just make sure everything's as polished as it can be.
I think the team size that we had is just such a perfect point for just like making development of a game a fun thing to do. We have a team size where everyone can have a good amount of involvement and everyone can have their own input into the creative direction of the game. I think that the bigger you get, the harder it is for everyone's time to be useful every working day. And I just think like that was so key to how much we were able to make in 3 years development, like small team. So it's just, I think for us, we've just hit the sweet spot for our own team. I think the amount of things that we like had as in the early stages as like one of those kind of stretch goal ideas that wasn't necessarily essential to the core of the game, but was a fun little touch that we wanted to do, or like a moment of attention to detail. Like, for example, the little forest spirits that appear everywhere in the world. And there's just so many little things like that in the game that I think that's something that we've realized is such a big part of why people have enjoyed the game, that it's something that I really want to make sure that we always do in our future work as well.
The chopping a sign in half thing, that video got more views than our trailer. Like, more people have probably bought the game on the back of that than they have from like seeing any actual gameplay or anything. Just like, oh cool, you can chop a sign in half and then read the text, and the UI is in half as well. I'm gonna buy this game. So like, I think people really appreciate kind of that level of detail in games when it's clear you've put like your heart and soul into it.
Yeah, a lot of like handcrafted effort in particular, which I think is something that you can do so much more of as an indie game in a small team. You know, everything you're putting in the game is kind of like bespoke, made from scratch, rather than trying to fill a huge world and a huge playtime. It just means that every moment in the game can be more memorable and can be something that as developers we have more fun with.
So there's a lot of things in the game where it's just like these random little things where we just say, okay, let's try this idea out, and we do it, and it suddenly turns into a good idea.
I'm just curious about what the future holds for Acid Nerve. Obviously, you guys can't get too specific about it, but just in kind of broad strokes, what's the future look like for you guys?
We probably will make another game as Acid Nerve again at some point in the future.
Yeah, we're going to carry on making games for sure, but like,
yeah,
I don't know what it's going to be yet. We've got time to kind of figure it out, and like thankfully this game has done well, so we can relax a bit and then work out what we want to do next.